Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be kind of strange. I'm mostly intending this for people that I haven't really been able to talk to in person, so like family members or Facebook friends, but I thought that I'd leave it on my channel as well for new incoming people that were interested. Yeah, so I guess let's just get into it. Here we are in June, which is Pride Month. Initially when I was growing up, it was mostly about like gay pride and acceptance. Now that's kind of shifted to be a little bit more all-inclusive, and generally considered to be like LGBTQA+. I don't remember what the full acronym is, but generally covering the celebration of anyone who is not cisgendered and straight. So like, this is a coming out video. Welcome to my life now. I'm non-binary. Really quick at the top, I want to put out a quick disclaimer. In terms of like understanding gender identities and gender theory and like how people talk and think about things, I'm fairly new to this. I'm still kind of going through the process of figuring out what I am, and sort of understanding and like unlearning how to think about like gender and identity. So if I make mistakes, apologies. Also, it's important to keep in mind, if you are a cisgendered person, which is to say a person who identifies as their assigned gender, either being assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth, queer experiences are not monolithic. I can only speak to how this has affected me and how I think about it, but obviously there are a million different ways to interpret gender and its expression and how people think and talk about it. I think there are a couple of good ways, but I can't say that I have the definitive answer in any given situation. Like I said, I can only speak to my experience and my thought processes. Let's see. The other thing that I wanted to define really quick before we get into the meat of the video is that I want to draw a distinction between feminine and masculine versus male and female. I'll be referring to them by their shortened version, femme and masc. But essentially, when I'm talking about femme or masc, I'm specifically talking about presentation. We'll talk more about that later in the video. But specifically, the aesthetics and ideas that we associate with femininity and masculinity are a social construct. They are a cultural construct. Things that are explicitly feminine and masculine in American society and culture could be different from area to area, but when I say femme and masc, I'm specifically talking aesthetically, and that's distinct from female and male, which I'm going to be using to specifically refer to female and male gender. And again, we'll talk more about presentation later on in the video. So I guess that's about it. Let's get started. So I guess the most pressing thing to address up front is what does it mean to be non-binary? The way that we are taught gender most of the time, this has obviously changed as we've gone through the years and gotten more progressive, and genders, even talking about binary genders, have become more inclusive in terms of what you can and can't do and still represent male or female. I like to think of gender as a spectrum, and on one end you have male. So that includes people who are born as male or people who identify as male despite what their assigned gender is. And then on the opposite end you have female, which again covers people who are cisgendered females or people who identify as female. And then everything else that fits in the center of that range is a non-binary identity, which is essentially to say that non-binary people are people that do not fall or do not identify within the two prescribed gender identities. Also, for the purposes of this video, non-binary is also considered a trans identity. The way that I've heard people use the word trans growing up is to specifically refer to trans men or trans women, and specifically people who are assigned one gender at birth and who are in the position or in the process of transitioning to the opposite gender. But as I've been reading and looking things up, it seems like trans is a more inclusive title than I had originally thought, that essentially also refers to anyone who doesn't fall within the gender binary. Again, this is my understanding. I could be wrong. Don't at me. So what does that mean to me? My whole life, growing up, I don't think I've ever really been comfortable with the term male. I don't feel like it describes me. Even though for most of my life I've presented as male and defaulted to male, essentially because of convenience and because I didn't really have like the inclination to really like explore or figure out like what that meant. It just wasn't that important to me. But also, I don't feel like female is a particularly accurate descriptor for me either. I'm somewhere in between. So if you think of going back to non-binary as a more blanket term, there are a wide variety, like an impossibly wide variety of specific identities within the non-binary umbrella. One of the things that I did, and if you ever want like a really interesting just like dive, like a wiki dive, I highly recommend checking out the gender.wikia page, because there's a fascinating, absolutely fascinating amount of individual genders and like ways people identify. Really interesting stuff. So there was one night, I think, where I was just reading, just like going through that wiki and trying to see if I could find something that felt more authentic or felt more truthful. One of the things that a lot of closeted or not necessarily outwardly presenting queer or trans people talk about is being able to live their authentic self. And that's an idea that really resonates with me. And so while I was looking, the first thing that I came across that really felt right was the term agender. Agender is a non-binary identity that can basically be described as the identity of non-identity. So essentially, agender people, again, understanding that each person's identity is personal and therefore as diverse as the amount of identities are. Agender people typically do not don't identify with the concept of gender. Either they don't care enough to gender themselves, they have not found a gender that fits, or their gender is more complex than can be described with a single term. I think while I was searching, the thing that really stuck out to me is not identifying with the idea of gender. Pretty much ever since I was a kid, but especially as I had gotten older and sort of learned more about the sort of gross capitalism that goes on with gender, and especially like, oh, this is a pink mechanical pencil for girls, or this is a pink lighter for girls because we stuck flowers on it and it's 10 times more than a boy's lighter. Things like that always really turned me off from, I think, the idea of gender. Also, though pretty like quiet and not necessarily what you could call a rebellious person, I always rankled at the idea of clothing specifically being gendered, because it's just like pieces of cloth you put on your body. It's stupid. And so I think that sort of seed of that idea has always kind of stuck with me, and that's a big reason the agender identity resonates with me so much. As I have been experimenting with presentation and specifically looking at trying to get the way I present and the way I look on a daily basis closer to what I think my ideal for right now is, I've been finding that I feel better presenting more femme, which is to say in a way that is more closely associated with females. On Monday, as just sort of a whim, because it was supposed to be hot this week, which, by the way, if you're living in Portland, dang, it got hot. Just for kind of fun, I decided to shave off all of my facial hair. Maybe I will put up a picture of what I looked like previous to this, in case you're not familiar, but feel free to jump back into any of the YouTube videos that I've put out previous to this one and the most recent makeup video, and you'll see that facial hair has always been a big part of my look and presentation in the past. And it's really hard to kind of describe to people. So in a lot of times when people, specifically trans people, talk about the experience of being trans, especially before you are comfortable being out or you are presenting in a way that is more close to whatever your ideal is, there's the idea of body dysphoria, which is essentially to look at yourself and feel like something is wrong. Generally speaking, when people talk about body dysphoria, they experience it specifically regarding their genitals. At least that's the way I'm used to having it used. So someone that might be assigned male at birth, but is a trans woman, but is in the in-between stages when they just can't afford to medically transition, or they don't feel safe presenting female. They experience body dysphoria, which is, again, like looking at your body and not feeling like it's the real you, essentially, is, I think, the best way I can describe it. And by the way, this is something that everybody experiences as far as I know. I can definitely say also, as growing up and being fat my whole life, I internalized a lot of like negative thoughts and feelings about the way my body should look. That's a dysphoric experience. But for me personally, I've never experienced like, it's so hot. Can I just say really quick, can we just take a break and let me tell you that it's so hot right now? I'm literally sweating, and there's one sweat drop that has made its way down into my eyes. carrying with it all of the makeup on my face, which is not a pleasant experience. Okay, so anyway, and I can't really describe it to you other than, like, have you ever just looked at yourself in the mirror and been like, damn, like, that's a good looking person, like, want me? Want me looking at me in the mirror? Like, and I've never really had that before. I have sort of swung wildly back and forth in terms of my, like, self-confidence with my body and how much I like or dislike it. But I've never really had, even at my most, like, body positive, I've never really had the experience of just like, hey, that's a good looking guy. And I started to have it once I started wearing makeup a little bit, you know. I would just, like, catch glimpses of myself in the mirror and be like, yeah, nice makeup. And once I had shaved all my hair, my facial hair off, like, I legitimately cannot impress upon you the amount of just absolute joy that I experienced just looking at myself in the mirror. That's the opposite of body dysphoria, by the way. That is what we call body euphoria, which obviously is the opposite of dysphoria, the feeling of looking at yourself and being filled with joy. There is another gender identity, if I can move us along, that I don't know if it's really quite fully descriptive of me, but it feels more... Can I just stop sweating into my eyes? Oh. Bye-bye makeup. Oh. There's a smaller umbrella within the big umbrella of non-binary, which is this is a word that I have no practice saying out loud, but Androgyne, which is a subcategory of more androgynous identities within non-binary. Essentially, it describes a person who experiences both masculine and feminine genders, considers themselves to be like a mix of both, not necessarily in equal parts. So it's possible that at some point I might identify more closely with femme androgyne, which is to say someone who identifies more closely with feminine traits but still considers themselves androgynous. So let's talk about presentation versus gender. In our society, we tend to think of gender and presentation as sort of a package deal. Men present masculine, females present feminine, and by that token, I think there's generally an idea of non-binary people being expected to present more gender neutral, especially because oftentimes non-binary people prefer they/them terms, pronouns. But the way that I try and think of it is your gender and your presentation are two separate aspects of your personality. You can identify with whatever terminology or whatever set of ideas that fit your gender on the one hand, and then you can also present however you would like as well. So for myself personally, though I do identify as non-binary, I feel like I resonate and get euphoria from presenting with a lot of more feminine traits. So things like wearing makeup, having long hair. I don't know if I'm ready to commit to something like laser hair removal or I'm not necessarily looking to medically alter my body at all. But I do find the more that I think about it, the more I identify with the aesthetics of femininity. The last thing that I really want to touch on is the idea of prescriptive gender versus descriptive gender. Typically, as I was talking about, we kind of think of gender as a package deal with presentation. This is an example of prescriptive gender. It's something that you are given by someone else, and it determines what you act and look like and do and think and how you are as a person. Obviously, the close linguistic connection there would be it's much like a prescription from a doctor, versus the idea of descriptive gender, which is that there are a bunch of gender terms and you get to choose which one describes you the most. And again, sort of linking into the idea that queer people's experiences and how they are is not a monolith. It's okay for those to identify individually, and each person, even if they fall under the same category, can experience that category within a wide variety. So the thing that people usually ask, or probably should ask if they don't, when they have somebody come out to them, is like, what can I do to support you? And that's a fairly easy question for me. Since I am in this sort of transitional period, I don't really know where I will end up, what I will look like, what I will identify by then as. So I guess the big thing for me is to be able to have the space to experiment and transition. And that means things like, you know, maybe I want to try like having fake breasts, or maybe I want to try doing like feminine voice training, or maybe I want to have, you know, gender affirming surgery at some point. I need the space and the safety to do that. That's the big thing, right? Is feeling like you have the comfort and the support from people to do that. In terms of what you can do directly for me, I will insist that, or ask that people use they, them pronouns for me. I'm not at a point where I really feel like I need to change my name to feel more authentic. That might come at some point, at the point where I am, you know, presenting passing female or femme. You know, I might feel like I want a more feminine name. We're not there yet. So who knows? We'll get there when we get there. But the big thing I think that you could do for me or on my behalf is to be supportive of other trans people. A lot of social media platforms that are not specifically geared towards queer and trans audiences have been known to devalue content from out trans individuals. It happens on YouTube, it happens on Twitch. So if you find content creators that you like, please support them. They need it. There is a thing going on right now that's still hard for me to wrap my mind around. I'll throw a link in the description to the specific video, but Jim Sterling recently came out as trans feminine non-binary, and basically overnight lost an absolutely unreal amount of subscribers, basically just for saying that they were queer, that they were trans. There are tons of really great content creators, specifically on YouTube, that are doing fascinating social analysis or literary analysis. That's a big thing for me. I like commentary, and I like those, sort of deep dive analysis videos. So that's what I find really interesting. But support people's makeup channels, support people that just want to play video games online and like be their authentic self. The best thing that you can do for me is to be supportive of other trans creators. And you might say to yourself, well, I would love to, James, but I just don't know any. Look for them. They're not hard to find. They're everywhere. I will, I will link some of my favorite non-binary or trans creators in the description for this video, but I encourage you to just look them up, just seek them out, just do it. Thank you everybody for coming on this wild ride with me. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much and stayed fairly cohesive. Feel free to leave me questions in the comments. If you have any, I will try and be as specific or clarify things as I can. But other than that, enjoy Pride Month, and also remember that LGBTQ plus people are important and in need of support, even when it's not June. Maybe especially when it's not June. I love you all. I hope you have a great day and continue to have a great life.